And President Trump is keeping his military options open against Iran with a deal yet to be reached.
Right now we're negotiating, and we'll see. But either we're going to get it one way or the other. They're not going to have a nuclear weapon. You will have a nuclear war in the Middle East, and that war will come here. That war will go to Europe. We cannot let that happen, and it won't happen. It's not going to happen. That's more important than anything else. We can't. I can think of nothing that's more important than the fact that we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon, and we won't.
CENTCOM still enforcing its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, saying as of May 21, CENTCOM forces have redirected 94 commercial vessels and disabled 4 while enforcing the blockade to prevent the flow of commerce into and out of Iranian ports. Mike Torelli, retired Navy SEAL and host of the Everyday Warrior podcast, is here now to react. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. We have some new comments from Secretary Rubio on this topic. Here he is just moments ago.
There's a pattern unfolding with Trump and Iran that I need to walk you through, because the threats we're hearing right now aren't happening in a vacuum. They're part of a much larger escalation that's been building for months, and when you see the full timeline, what emerges is deeply concerning. Let me be clear from the start. This is my analysis, my opinion based on publicly documented events. I'm not claiming insider knowledge. I'm simply connecting dots from verified reporting, and what I'm seeing is a president who has repeatedly threatened drastic action against Iran, set multiple deadlines, and then either extended them or followed through with strikes that didn't achieve their stated objectives. Let's start with the most recent and most alarming threat. On April 7th, 2026, Trump posted on Truth Social what may be the most extreme language any American president has ever used publicly toward another nation. He wrote, and these are his exact words, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again." This wasn't hyperbole buried in a long speech. This was a direct, specific threat posted to social media hours before an 8 p.m. Eastern Time deadline he had set for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He threatened to destroy Iran's bridges, power plants, and desalination facilities, all civilian infrastructure that millions of people depend on to survive. Think about what that threat actually means. Iran has a population of over 90 million people. Destroying power plants doesn't just turn off the lights. It shuts down hospitals, water treatment systems, heating and cooling systems. Amnesty International immediately condemned the threat, stating that targeting civilian infrastructure on this scale would constitute war crimes under international humanitarian law. And here's what makes this particularly disturbing. Less than 2 hours before his own deadline, after Pakistan's prime minister intervened, Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire. He went from threatening to end an entire civilization to agreeing to a temporary pause in the span of about 90 minutes. This is the third time Trump has set a deadline, threatened massive military action, and then either extended the deadline or agreed to a temporary ceasefire. The pattern is now documented and undeniable. Let me walk you through the full timeline, because understanding how we got here is essential to understanding where this might go next. On June 21st, 2025, Trump ordered what the Pentagon called Operation Midnight Hammer, a massive airstrike on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities: Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. According to Pentagon briefings, this operation involved 125 aircraft, including 7 B-2 stealth bombers carrying 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs specifically designed to destroy underground facilities. Trump immediately claimed the operation was a complete and total obliteration of Iran's nuclear program. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called it an overwhelming success. But according to military analysts and subsequent intelligence assessments, the reality was more complex. The sites were severely damaged, yes, but destroyed, completely obliterated. Multiple sources, including reporting from the New York Times citing Israeli military officials, indicated that Fordow was substantially damaged but not destroyed. The Congressional Research Service noted that while enrichment capabilities were degraded, Iran's nuclear program was set back, not eliminated. In my assessment, this matters enormously because Trump's subsequent threats have been based on the claim that Iran is rebuilding a nuclear program that was supposedly completely destroyed. If the program wasn't fully destroyed in June 2025, then the entire justification for what followed becomes questionable. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what's now documented as the beginning of the 2026 Iran war. According to multiple sources, including the House of Commons Library research briefing, this joint operation targeted military and government sites across Iran. The most significant outcome, according to reporting from multiple sources, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in these strikes. Iran appointed his son as successor and launched massive counterstrikes against Israel, U.S. military bases in the region, and targets in Arab states that allowed U.S. operations. Iran's primary countermeasure was closing the Strait of Hormuz, a 21-mile-wide choke point through which approximately 20% of the world's oil passes. This single action triggered a global energy crisis that's still ongoing. Here's where Trump's pattern of threats and deadline extensions becomes clear, and it's all documented in contemporaneous reporting. March 9th, Trump falsely claimed that Iran's military had been 100% destroyed and that the Strait had reopened. Neither statement was accurate. The Strait remained effectively closed, and Iranian military capabilities, while degraded, were clearly still operational. March 15th, Trump demanded that NATO and China help reopen the Strait, posting on Truth Social that other nations should send ships, while the U.S. continues to bomb the shoreline. March 21st, Trump threatened to target Iran's civilian energy infrastructure if Iran didn't allow ships through the Strait. This was the first explicit threat against civilian targets. March 23rd, Trump told reporters the Strait would open very soon after claiming productive talks with Iran. Iran's state media immediately denied any such talks occurred. March 26th, Trump issued a 10-day ultimatum for Iran to make a deal or open up the Hormuz Strait. He then claimed he pushed back his own deadline at Iran's request, though Iran publicly rejected the U.S. proposal as one-sided and unfair. April 5th, Trump issued a 48-hour ultimatum threatening severe consequences if Iran didn't comply. April 7th, Trump issued his final deadline, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and made the whole civilization will die tonight threat. In my analysis, this pattern reveals something critical. Trump sets dramatic deadlines to project strength and force negotiations, but when the deadlines arrive, he either extends them or accepts temporary measures that don't resolve the underlying issues. Each extension undermines the credibility of the next threat. When peace talks in Islamabad failed, Trump announced on April 13th that the U.S. would impose a naval blockade on Iran, preventing ships from entering or leaving Iranian ports near the Strait of Hormuz. According to U.S. Central Command, the blockade would not impede freedom of navigation for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports, but it would target any vessel attempting to reach Iranian ports. Trump framed this as stopping Iran from blackmailing the world by controlling the Strait. But here's the strategic problem. Iran had already closed the Strait. The U.S. blockade didn't reopen it. It added a second layer of restriction on top of Iran's closure. According to available documentation as of late April 2026, the blockade has cost Iran an estimated $500 million daily. The U.S. has seized 3 ships and intercepted 33 vessels. Iran has retaliated by seizing 2 cargo ships. But the Strait itself still effectively closed to most commercial traffic. The global energy crisis still ongoing. Before I continue with my analysis of where this goes next, let me ask you, do you think Trump's repeated deadline extensions and threats are an effective strategy for dealing with Iran, or do they undermine American credibility? Drop your perspective in the comments. And if this kind of detailed analysis is valuable to you, hit that subscribe button because this situation is developing rapidly. Now let me talk about something that's getting buried in the strategic analysis: the human cost of this conflict, which is documented but often ignored in American coverage. According to reporting on the 2026 Iran war, when protests broke out inside Iran in December 2025 and January 2026, sparked by economic collapse following the war and sanctions, Iranian security forces killed at least 30,000 people in a brutal crackdown on January 8, 2026. 30,000 people. That number comes from officials in Iran's own Ministry of Health. Trump had threatened U.S. intervention if Iranian forces killed protesters. He posted We are locked and loaded and ready to go on Truth Social. The crackdown happened anyway. The U.S. did not intervene militarily. In the Strait of Hormuz crisis itself, according to available documentation, at least 12 seafarers have been killed or are missing. 17 merchant ships have been damaged, 7 of them abandoned. 1 port worker was killed in Bahrain with 2 more wounded. These aren't just statistics. These are real people caught in a conflict zone that encompasses one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Here's my analysis of where this stands right now, based on everything I've reviewed. Trump launched Operation Midnight Hammer, claiming it would completely destroy Iran's nuclear program and bring peace to the Middle East. 8 months later, his own special envoy, Steve Witkoff, stated that Iran is approximately 1 week away from having enough material to build a nuclear weapon. Think about that contradiction. If the June 2025 strikes obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities, as Trump claims, how is Iran 1 week away from a bomb 8 months later? The most likely explanation, in my assessment, is that Operation Midnight Hammer severely damaged but did not destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Iran has been rebuilding, and we're now in a cycle where Trump threatens military action to stop a program that his first military action failed to eliminate. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, triggering a global energy crisis. Oil prices have spiked above $100 per barrel at times. Asia is experiencing fuel shortages. The economic impact is rippling worldwide. Trump has responded by setting multiple deadlines, each with threats of drastic action. Each deadline has either been extended or resulted in temporary ceasefires that haven't resolved the fundamental issues. Iran wants control of the Strait, war reparations, a regional ceasefire, including Lebanon, and release of its frozen assets. The U.S. demands Iran abandon its nuclear program and fully reopen the Strait. Neither side is getting what it wants. And in the middle, global shipping is paralyzed, energy prices are unstable, and the threat of wider war looms over every failed negotiation round. I see 3 possible trajectories from here. Scenario 1, escalation to major war. Trump has explicitly threatened to destroy Iran's entire civilian infrastructure: bridges, power plants, desalination facilities. If he follows through on those threats, Iran will retaliate massively. The conflict could draw in Iran's regional allies, potentially including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Houthi forces in Yemen, who have already threatened to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait if the U.S. escalates. This scenario could spiral into a regional war that makes the current crisis look contained by comparison. Scenario 2, indefinite stalemate. The pattern of temporary ceasefires and extended deadlines continues indefinitely. The Strait remains mostly closed. The global economy adapts to higher energy prices and disrupted shipping routes. Iran continues nuclear development at whatever pace its damaged facilities allow. The U.S. maintains its blockade. Neither side wins, but neither side is willing to back down enough to reach a permanent settlement. This is perhaps the most likely scenario in my assessment, because it allows both sides to avoid the costs of major war while maintaining their core positions. Scenario 3, negotiated settlement. Pakistan, which has been mediating, continues to broker talks. China, which is Iran's largest trading partner and has a vested interest in reopening the Strait, applies pressure behind the scenes. Eventually, a framework emerges where Iran reopens the Strait in exchange for sanctions relief and a face-saving nuclear agreement that both sides can claim as victory. This scenario requires both Trump and Iran's leadership to prioritize practical outcomes over rhetorical positioning, which hasn't been characteristic of either side so far. There are several dimensions of this crisis that aren't getting adequate attention in American media. The precedent. Trump has now threatened to destroy an entire civilization's infrastructure as leverage in negotiations. That threat was condemned by Amnesty International, Pope Leo XIV, and multiple international legal experts as potentially constituting war crimes. Regardless of whether he follows through, the fact that an American president made that threat publicly changes the boundaries of acceptable discourse in international relations. The credibility cost. Every deadline Trump sets and then extends undermines the credibility of the next deadline. Iran has now watched Trump threaten massive action 3 separate times and then either extend the deadline or accept temporary measures. That pattern teaches Iran that Trump's deadlines aren't actually final, which makes future negotiations harder, not easier. The global economic impact. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz affects roughly 20% of global oil shipments and a similar percentage of liquefied natural gas trade. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and India depend heavily on energy transiting through that waterway. The longer this crisis continues, the more those countries will invest in alternative routes and suppliers, permanently changing global energy trade patterns, even if the strait eventually reopens. Based on everything I've documented here, Trump's pattern of threats and deadline extensions, the failure of Operation Midnight Hammer to achieve its stated objectives, the ongoing closure of the strait despite multiple U.S. military actions and the humanitarian costs that are mounting, my assessment is that we're watching a foreign policy approach that prioritizes dramatic threats over sustainable strategy. Threatening to end a civilization might generate headlines. It might create temporary pressure in negotiations, but it also backs both sides into corners where backing down looks like weakness. And in international relations, perceived weakness can be more dangerous than actual military defeat because it invites future challenges. Trump claimed Operation Midnight Hammer would bring peace. Instead, we got an 8-month war with no resolution in sight. He's threatened drastic action repeatedly, but drastic threats without clear strategic objectives or sustainable follow-through don't actually resolve conflicts. They escalate them or freeze them in destructive stalemates. I'm going to keep tracking this closely as it develops. The next deadline, the next ceasefire negotiation, the next threat, they're all coming because this pattern shows no signs of changing until something fundamentally shifts in either Washington or Tehran. This isn't about partisan politics. This is about whether the documented approach we're seeing can actually achieve its stated goals, or whether we're locked in a cycle of escalating threats that can't deliver sustainable outcomes. The evidence so far suggests the latter. And that should concern all of us, regardless of our political preferences.